Hello, conscious investor, and welcome back. I'm your host, Julie Hawley. For over 4 years, I've paired my background in real estate investing, education, and coaching to create powerful content for you each week. This podcast is where we take a holistic approach to investing by focusing on 3 ingredients to a life of personal freedom: health, mindset, and wealth. We'll talk about everything from passive investing through syndication and how to use your retirement accounts to boost your investing, to mineral balancing and gut-brain health, and into topics that cultivate your inner strength and resilience so you can thrive regardless of any of life's current events. And yes, those are all episodes currently available and linked in the show notes below. Join me each Monday for a mindset episode and later in the week for an interview with expert investors and health professionals so that you can experience your greatest health, strongest mindset, and build the wisest wealth. Welcome back, Conscious Investor. Today, I am joined by Mike. And in this conversation, we are going to talk very specifically about 1031 exchanges. If you don't know what a 1031 exchange is, do not worry. We are going to go into the ins and outs of 1031 exchanges. We go into what it is and how it works and the tax advantages of it. We talk about who can utilize a 1031 tax exchange. He goes into the details as to how do these 1031 exchanges actually work. Why do you need an intermediary, and why is his company such a powerful qualified intermediary to work with? He also gives you some great considerations like, hey, this doesn't apply to your primary residence. No, you can't use your 1031 exchange on vacation homes. Like if you hang out in that place more than 14 days, you're not going to qualify. You can't use it on a fix and flip. So he's going to go through all of those details and nuances about it. But ultimately, I think you're going to find just as I do, 1031 exchanges are a powerful tool for real estate investors to grow their wealth by deferring capital gains. In fact, one of my favorite quotes that he had was, he says, swap until you drop. And it's just a funny way of talking about the benefits of repeated 1031 exchanges. We also talk about how can we 1031 exchange out of a syndication or into a syndication, and what are the nuances of that. So if you are a passive investor, if you're an active investor, this is really important for you to understand in your investing process. And wealth is one of the powerful echelons of the conscious investor. And so I'm confident this is going to support you in a powerful way. And as always, I want you to, remember this show is sponsored by Three Keys Investments. Three Keys Investments provides passive investment opportunities that provide housing for humans through investments in multi-million-dollar apartment complexes and assisted living facilities. So you can say goodbye to the hassle and headaches of owning rentals and say hello to living the life you want with the people you love, all while enjoying the real ownership in real estate. Let's get started. Mike, I am so excited to have you on the Conscious Investor podcast. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Real excited to be here.
I'm excited about this conversation, but let's dive into the basics, right? The one question we launch the show with every time. What do you do and how did you get started?
Yeah, so I work for a company called 1031 Specialists. We're a qualified intermediary that facilitates 1031 exchanges for investors in all 50 states across the country. To be honest, never thought I would be in this weird specific niche of real estate. I've done a bunch of 1031s myself as a real estate investor and started my career in brokerage, and then on the principal side, buying multifamily properties for a large West Coast operator. And during COVID, when the activity, subsided a little bit, I had an opportunity to meet some of these guys here in Denver, where I'm located, and they were doing some really interesting things and talk to me about this qualified intermediary business. And I was like, my partner John, who started, I'm like, John, what's so special about a qualified intermediary business, right? Like they just collect a fee and do the paperwork. And they said, Mike, here's what's so interesting. 80% of the qualified intermediary business is owned by the big 3 title companies: Fidelity, First American, Stewart. They've got their little subsidiary companies that are rebranded and named something else. And then the 20% are, the CPAs, the attorneys, the guys that really do this on the side, or the local guys in all the communities that have been doing the missionary marketing, the lunch and learns for the past 30 years. These guys are 65 years old. They have a website that hasn't been updated in 15 years. They've got no social media, as you know, Julie. It's super important right now to have a presence, and they give their broker partners and investors no incentive to work with them besides just saying, "Hey, I'm just going to do a good job." And we know that's really not the case most of the time, right? So, I saw the opportunity, and I've been here for 6 months, and it's been really great, learning and meeting people like you and just trying to make sure that the 1031 education is out there to the masses, because we believe if you're a real estate investor, it's something you should at least explore. But a lot of people, for whatever reason, get hung up on it, and don't know kind of where to start.
I can tell you that, you and I, as real estate investors, we have an opportunity to speak with private investors, and it blows my mind how many investors don't know about the 1031 exchange. Like, they're savvy, experienced investors. Like, I have some friends, they had been transacting they for years, like 2 decades, did not know about a 1031. And I was just, my mind was blown. I'm like, how did you not know about this? How have you been paying all those taxes? What? So,
Yeah, I mean, it's like the thing about real estate investing is to generate more money, right? And generate more cash flow. But like, yet people aren't using one of the, most, we call it a gift from our government to real estate investors, like the eighth wonder of the world. They're not even, exploring it just a little bit to see how they can get to their financial goals faster. And, we're kind of dumbfounded too. So now it's our mission to kind of get out there and, spread the good 1031 word.
it's just so important. All right. So we might actually be talking above you, precious conscious investor. So we're going to back everything up, because maybe you're like my friends who had been investing for 20 years and did not know what a 1031 was. And you know what? I have to apologize. Conscious investor, I didn't mean to step on your feelers if that did. We all learn. Remember, I didn't learn about syndication until I was in my 40s, and I'd been involved in real estate. So the best part about this whole process is that we can learn and we can expand on what our investing practices. So let's back way up, Mike, to the beginning and say, Mike, what is a 1031 exchange?
Yeah, let me break this down simple for people. So a 1031 exchange, really simple, guys, is the swap of one investment property for another investment property without paying a dime in tax. And 1031s have actually been around the US for 100 years. And it's been, the grandmasters, the guys, who you see on TV, they've been utilizing it for a long time. And, you know, as long as you're a real estate investor, you can do a 1031 exchange. No, no exclusion.
Okay, when we say real estate investor, some people might say, oh, I have to be like Julie and Mike, and I have to go and buy apartment complexes or commercial real estate. So let's even break down who is qualified as a real estate investor.
Yeah, I mean, simply put, you can inherit a piece of land and you are a real estate investor, right? So it could be there are more than 16 different types of real estate that qualify for someone that owns a real estate investment, property. It cannot be a second home that you Airbnb occasionally and spend, 3 months out of the year there. That's not an investment property. That's personal use. There's a 14-day personal use, maximum that the IRS allows for someone to do a 1031 on their, vacation home. And most people, can't do that. But for most people, as long as you own like an investment property, this isn't for something for primary homes or second homes. And again, investment property, it's broad, but there are so many different types of investment property that qualify. And the great thing, Julie, is like you can swap from property to property, from asset class, from city to city, as long as it's in the US and as long as it's held for real estate or business purposes.
Love it. Okay. So I can swap from, I was just, talking to my friend Denise about land. I can swap from land into retail. I could swap from retail into multifamily. I can swap from multifamily into land. I could go for like we can. I just want to exaggerate this a bit.
Oh, oh, you want let's exaggerate it a lot. You can
Yeah,
swap a piece
yeah.
of raw land for a rental home. Okay, you can go from office building to a shopping center. You can go from buying a property, owning a property in Seattle to swapping something in Florida. And you can. This is a great strategy for when the market changes and when different asset classes become really popular. Last 3 or 4 years, multifamily was all the rage. Now we're starting to see, some fixed expenses really increasing, and people are want, property like retail, for instance, or single tenant net lease in the Midwest that have great yield. That's an option too. So you can, as the market changes, you can consolidate. You can go from one property, you can go from three properties to one, or you can expand your portfolio. You can go from one property to three to diversify. So it's a really great tool. And we like to say like the options are infinite. So you definitely can have that be something part of your investment strategy.
I love it. Okay, is there anything we cannot invest into? Just to over
Primary.
exaggerate that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, primary homes. Like we get people all the time calling up, like, "Hey, I'm doing a prime. I'm going to buy this, and I want to, have a primary property or a second home. Vacation homes. Like a vacation home is obviously different than an Airbnb business where someone doesn't live or use too much, 2 weeks out of the year. So I would say as long as it's an investment property and not a property where someone is, doing a quick rehab and flipping, that is something, that someone could do. And, just to expand on that a little bit for for everyone listening, the IRS really breaks it down by intent, right? So they look at it, if you ever get audited, they look at it to say, hey, you know what? Was the intent to buy it as an investment property or was the intent to buy it as a fix and flip? Because investment property, you typically have a tenant which signs a lease and you collect rental income. That is primarily how you collect income from an investment property. Whereas a flipper developer, on the other hand, typically codify, their inventory held for sale on their books, and they get, the economics derived from a sale, which, the IRS says, we're going to tax you from a, capital gains perspective. So that's, kind of what I want to, make sure people realize because we have a lot of flippers call us and like, hey, I just did this quick fix and flip, and I'm like, yeah, that doesn't qualify.
That is not going to work. All right. How does this process work? Let's walk the conscious investor through the process.
Yeah, so typically a real estate a 1031 transaction happens just like any other real estate transaction, except for a couple key differences. All right, one is you have to use a qualified intermediary like 1031 specialists. A qualified intermediary is really an independent third party mandated by the IRS to facilitate a 1031 transaction. Cannot be your own broker, cannot be your own attorney. It's got to be someone completely independent. Two, and this is the most important thing, Julie, is an investor cannot take constructive receipt of their funds, which means the funds from the sale of your property cannot hit your bank account for even a second, or else the 1031 will fail. So typically what happens, you're going to have a property that you're selling, you're going to have a contract on that property. An investor is going to sign an agreement with a qualified intermediary, and the qualified intermediary does three things. One, we consult before and during the transaction, we plan ahead. Two, we make sure from a timing perspective, and I'll get into that a little bit later, that all the deadlines and all the compliance documents are up to Section 1031 and turned in at the right time. And three, we protect and direct the funds. We are not the bank. We don't hold the money. We don't invest the money. We just facilitate the transaction. So when it comes to you closing on your property that you're selling, Julie, we come in, the investor assigns the proceeds to us. We direct those funds to our partner's bank that's FDIC insured. The funds sit in a segregated trust account in that client's name or that entity's name. It sits there for the duration of the 1031 transaction. And then once they close on the replacement property, we instruct that partner bank to wire the funds to the seller of that replacement property, thus completing the 1031 exchange. And there are some timelines involved, which are really important. One,
Mhm.
On the date that you close of your property, you've got 45 days to identify, three properties or property that are replacement properties, and you must close within 6 months. So, just to expand on this a little bit, a lot of people will say, "Hey, Mike, feels like I've got a gun to my head in terms of these timelines. Like, I don't know if I can identify, a replacement property enough, like with enough time. Like the clock's ticking." Well, here's what we say: the minute you go to decide to sell your property, start looking for replacement property. You can do that by yourself. You can make a short list. You can work with a broker to make a short list. You can actually put your replacement property under contract, assuming, as an investor, you don't go hard, of course. You don't want, non-refundable earnest money at risk. Or you can do something called the reverse exchange, where you buy a property first and sell a property in your portfolio last, second. But however, you got to be pretty well capitalized to do that, and a lot of people primarily have to sell the property that they're selling to buy the property that they're buying. And typically reverse exchanges, a lot of family office clients will do that just because they're well capitalized.
That's really interesting. I haven't heard of anyone doing the reverse, but that totally makes sense, especially if you are well capitalized. And that what a great buffer, an absolute amazing buffer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all about like optionality, right? I mean,
Right.
at the end of the day, like people can be as successful as they want to be, but it all comes down to planning ahead, right? And we just feel like that when you're working with us or in general, like, you do the hard work up front, you plan ahead, you're going to have a successful outcome. You don't, you're going to probably get a 30% tax hit, which is huge. And, you're going to have a lot less equity to be able to afford, another property that's going to generate less cash flow.
Oh my gosh, ain't nobody want that at all. So let's talk about this. I always hear, 1031 until you die. That's kind of the concept is like just keep the process going so that you're not getting hit by the taxes. And conscious investor going on record right now, neither of us are tax specialists and we're not providing or offering tax advice at all. But I do have some questions about that, like about the recapture or how can this go wrong. um at some point somebody decides like, okay, I'm off this 1031 bandwagon, which I don't know why anyone would get off of it, but if they decided they wanted to, what happens?
Yeah, look, I think here's what a lot of people don't realize, and I'll start with this, Julie, is that like, you know, there are no limit to the amount of time someone could do a 1031 exchange at all. And that is why the grandmasters in real estate just keep exchanging. They keep exchanging, you get, a step up in basis, you generate more cash flow. And like you mentioned, when your time on earth is up and your kids inherit your portfolio, they won't pay a dime in tax based on the appreciation that you made happen. So, that's kind of what we mean when we say swap till you drop, which is kind of, funny. But
I have never heard that, and
yeah.
that is fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, and so, the whole premise is like your heirs, will, get, a step up in basis and won't have to pay a dime in taxes. So they'll eventually, just keep the train rolling. If for whatever reason someone stops that train, you are going to have to pay, taxes based on, your entire portfolio of transactions aligned, right? It's specific to everyone's journey. I can't tell you like what that share is, but our whole thing is like, why wouldn't you just keep doing it? And for a lot of folks out there who are saying, hey, he just wants to be done with real estate, he's getting to that age where he just wants to retire. There are different vehicles which you can 1031 into that are a lot more passive, and that way your family can inherit the empire that you've built, and not be paying Uncle Sam a lot of money.
That's a great vehicle right there. So, what are some of the things that that you can 1031 into that are more passive?
Well, there are a couple things. Obviously, as there's like, it's called tenant in common tick
Hmm.
syndications, right? You're pretty familiar with those, where you become an LP, and tenants in common, essentially are set up that they're able to receive 1031 money, whereas other private syndication or even REITs, aren't 1031 allowable, let's call it. There's something also called, a Delaware statutory trust. They're called DSTs. There's a bunch of sponsors out there like Inland and Pasco who, you can 1031 into, their deals as an LP. There's something else called like a 721 exchange where you 1031 into, it's called an UPREIT, where you get shares, in exchange for your equity in a private fund. But after you do that, you lose your 1031 eligibility. So there's a couple different things, but typically from a passive income, I like triple net. I mean, I like single tenant net lease deals, and anything that is operationally less intensive as you evolve. Let's just put it nicely, and don't want to have to deal with the headaches of day to day management anymore.
That's really, really fascinating. Now, I want to double down since I invest, my company invests in multifamily and assisted living. And you touched on this because I literally, I showed you my phone earlier. I'm like, oh, yeah, yeah. I'm talking to an investor who wants to 1031 into our deals. And I'm like, hey, we might actually have a smaller deal that could be a joint venture, but when it comes to the syndication model and bringing in 1031 capital, it's like, unless you have a substantial amount of capital, it doesn't make sense for us to establish that tick. Let's go ahead and explain why we have to have that tenants in common or the tick in place in that syndication model to begin with.
Yeah. So, basically, tenant in common, all that means is when you are a tenant in common, you own a percentage of the deed. And I think with a regular syndication as an LP, the GP is on title, right? So you're actually not physically on title with a tenant in common. You own an actual percentage of the deal. For a syndication, you're a limited partner and you get distributions based on how much money you put in, let's just say. So like you mentioned, Julie, from a structuring perspective, like you know it takes a lot of work and effort to structure it the right way and make sure that it's 1031 compliant. And to a degree, it's definitely more expensive than just doing a regular syndication. But what I can tell you is, based where I'm sitting in, the real estate, circle today, like a lot of syndicators are trying to set up their funds as like tenants in common, just because capital raising, as is a lot tougher today than it has been in the past, and people are a lot more selective. So if you can, accept 1031 money in one of your deals, all of a sudden you're unlocking the potential for, more money in a new investor. So pros and cons to each, and definitely understand why setting it up at first is laborious, but it could be another avenue to kind of funding a deal.
And providing a powerful solution to people that are looking to continue their real estate investing in a different vehicle. Actually, so I was just talking with somebody about funds and trying to create and establish a fund that allows that 1031 flow in. Is that just a matter of within the fund having just putting a tick in there, or
Yeah, I mean, we're partnered with one of the best structuring attorneys in the country. He's been doing this for 40 years, literally. And, that's someone we can introduce you to, or just people in general, if they want to structure their deals as ticks. But there is some nuance around it. And you just have
Mhm.
to make sure that you set it up the right way, because again, like with the 1031, it's just like kind of like your personal taxes. It's kind of an honor code based system. And so whatever you put on your tax returns and your forms, like you only get in trouble if the IRS comes knocking, right? And if they do, you just want to make sure that everything is structured in a way that's compliant. And it makes sense to go, pay the extra money and go the extra mile just to make sure it's set up, just in case, you find yourself in that situation.
Definitely. Absolutely. It led to another question, and then my question just kind of like vaporized, which is not normal for me, but it just shows that I'm actually like, this is such an intriguing concept when we think about how are we supporting investors in their own personal portfolios, because conscious investor, many of you have just some small duplexes and single family homes that you are transacting with, so supporting you in that, but then looking at this at scale, how can we support people at scale, which is so powerful. I think the question I was going to ask, and this is more clarification for myself, and because what happens is that there are a lot of different people that are the quote experts that know how 1031s go, but that's just from their own personal experience. It's not what they do day in, day out. And so I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. So let's go back to the tick structure real fast and just say what I've heard is we need to have a tick for every single investor who's 10, doing a 1031 into a deal. Additionally, we've come into some turbulence in bringing in and trying to achieve this for investors in the past, um, because okay, great, now they have to get cleared by the lender. They have to go through the entire process that we are going through as a sponsor team. And so all that to say, accurate, not accurate, like what's your experience with this on the intermediary side?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think where we sit in the transaction, we typically let the attorneys handle that, in terms of like
Yeah.
the structuring aspect of it. So like any questions regarding that, like talk to your structuring attorney. Like we don't get involved in the weeds just because like again, like we try to be super, super independent as like our, which is mandated by the IRS. So, anyone who's like, hey, Mike, I've got a tax question. I'm like, go ask your CPA. Mike, I've got a structuring
Yes.
question. Go ask, your attorney or one of our attorneys that, we can recommend. So, here's what I'll say is like anything else, right? I think the theme here is like, if you plan your fund, ahead of time, right? Like, and not do it last minute,
Hmm.
there's a greater likelihood of success that it'll work out. I think where people run into issues is when they're trying to jam in and open up something when there's a shorter subscription period, right? Just to
Yeah.
kind of close the deal. And this, it's like, all right, like you got 1,000 balls in the air, like how are we going to make this happen? And it just gets really messy really quick. So, what I can say is like any of those questions, like if you're planning to do a tick structure or planning to go into a tick, like talk to an attorney and make sure you understand how it works. And that way you're better prepared, for your own, investment.
I love it. Yes, so, so, so true. Is there anything else do you think, hey, everyone in the world needs to know this about 1031s? Or let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's just like a like I said this before, it is just like a regular real estate transaction, except for a couple documents, right? And I think that is really the most important part. And, as former brokers and investors who, we've had the intention of starting this business. And one of the things that we realized is like everyone always, for whatever reason, is like, hey, I don't want to pay the fee if I don't close on the replacement property, right? Like that is a psychological barrier of friction. So what we've done is we've said, hey, you know what? We are going to give our investor clients 100% money back guarantee if they don't close on a replacement property or if they decide to opt out. So now, Julie, you, me, the investor, we're all in alignment to get a deal done where we either all get paid, just like a typical real estate transaction, or no one
Mm,
gets paid. And typically, my experience working with third party vendors, and I'm not going to name any, any specifics, but we all know those folks that have taken a deal hostage for 7 to 10 days and you've lost all momentum. And then doubt starts to creep in. And, either an investor or someone's like, actually, I don't know if I want to do this deal anymore. And that third party still gets paid and they don't really care about the outcome. Right. And so
mm.
our whole thing is like, well, that's kind of silly to, make someone pay us if they're not successful. And so we're trying to encourage and remove any friction to doing a 1031, any barriers. And that way, worst case scenario, you just pay the tax just like doing a regular deal
Okay.
if you
I
don't
love,
close on your replacement property.
and I think I love that concept of being structured in a way that um, it's just very transparent. It's very much a friendly approach to saying, hey, we're on your side. We're here to help you out. And yeah, that makes so much sense. How about misinformation? Is there, you probably get to hear and have seen a lot of things because, you know, you've been investing in real estate for so many years and everything just outside of this. So, what's some misinformation that needs to be corrected about 1031s?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, like people think that they have to go from like one multifamily to another multifamily and stay in the same asset class. Like that is like it blows people's minds when they realize like, oh yeah, this piece of land that I inherited that's not cash flowing at all. We can, use that to buy a retail building and now, make, hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash flow a year. Like that really blows people's minds. I think just in general, a lot of people really don't understand like, the timeline aspect of it. You've got 45 days from when you close again to identify properties, but really, that 45 days can turn into, as long as it takes, as much time as you want. Like you're the one who decides when you close. And if you're going to sell a property, like you should be looking for a replacement and you can line it up in a way where it's really easy. You can close on one thing, you can close on the property you're selling, and then close on the replacement property, that same week if you want. So I think from a planning perspective, people just are really confused. And then, I think just in general, like, the information out there of, if I'm in, if someone's in a partnership, right? And let's say Julie and I are in a partnership and, I want a 1031 and Julie doesn't want a 1031, you could still, go your separate ways and maintain your 1031 eligibility. But, you have to come back with that structuring attorney and make sure that something is set up before a PSA is signed so you can maintain your status. So, I think it's just the fear of people just not having that information, not being informed or even asking. And then again, like the most common one is like, yeah, like you can't do your primary home or your vacation home. Like, yeah, my wife and I stay in our vacation home for 3 months out of the year and then we invest it for 9 months. Well, still 3 months is still, 25% of the year, right? Like you can't do that. But I think first and foremost, it's just any city, any town, I think people get tripped up with like kind. What does like kind
Yes.
mean? It just like remove like kind. It just means investment property. So I think that is really I'm trying to simplify it for everyone. That is really the most important thing. And I think a lot of people get started with having a portfolio of homes that are cash flowing and they don't realize that they can consolidate those 20 homes into one multifamily building and now they're centralized and they don't have to stress from each property to property and that's totally doable. So it's just having the courage to ask questions and reach out for information. And we're trying to repackage and repurpose all this information into really cool material which we have. And I think before you've got people, let's say someone who's a lot older using a whiteboard, drawing out 1031, like no one's got time for that to listen to that stuff. And it's confusing. And, we want to make it approachable. So that's kind of what we're trying to do.
I love that. So let's go here and say, how do people connect up with you, and what kind of resources do you have available that they can download or?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, our website is 1031specialist.com. You could email us at 1031@1031specialist.com. We just came out with our how to do a 1031 exchange. It's called freetaxwealth.com. It's a 7-day once a day email for 7 days teaching you how to do a 1031 and the benefits. Really easy. We've got something called our 1031 Bible, which is literally, 99.9% of anything that you guys need to know about it. We've got all the materials. We also have something called the 1031 Exchange Calculator. My partners are former, Goldman Sachs, Ernst and Young guys. So before they actually launched this business, they downloaded all 150 calculators from all these other qualified intermediaries and they improved upon it. So we have that too. It's really great for specific scenarios. And if you want to understand what your tax liability is for your specific property, and then, what you need to do for a replacement property. And so actually, Julie, I just came into my mind, what is another myth or something that people should know? So one of the most common questions we get is how do we do a full tax deferral on our property? Meaning, if I sell a property for $1 million and I've got $500,000 in equity and a $500,000 mortgage, what do I need to identify to satisfy the full tax deferral? And this is really important. it's not just the equity. You got to replace the equity and the mortgage amount. So if you're going to buy a new property, you have to buy a property worth at least a million with that same mortgage amount and with that same, equity amount. And if you take a lesser, mortgage amount, you're going to have to bring more equity to the table to satisfy, that price, if that makes sense.
No, that does. That makes total sense. And yeah, I'm so glad that that came, that came to your mind because yeah, that's an important element right there that I think a lot of people overlook.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are just like, "Oh, I'm just gonna be looking at the equity amount," like, but it comes down to like the proceeds, and proceeds are, the equity and the debt that's on the deal. And, there's obviously a bunch of different ways you can replace that, but it's super important to know that, like, to get the full tax deferral, you have to replace both of those in the transaction.
Absolutely paramount. Gosh, this has been awesome, Mike. I really appreciate the time you've taken to just come in and kind of set some of the records straight and give us some of the inside edge because there's a lot of misinformation out there and there's a lot of just people need clarity on this whole entire concept.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on, and if anyone has any questions or scenarios, like, we're happy to answer at 631-438-1031.
I love that it ends with 1031. Wise choice for sure.
Kind of a vanity play, but yeah, I think it's easy for people.
Yeah, no, it totally works. I appreciate that. That's awesome. Conscious investor, thanks so much. I know that this it definitely helped clear the weeds for you on a lot of different levels, and probably even introduced many of you to this entirely new concept. So it's like that's what the conscious investor is here to serve you in that capacity. Please do remember that adventure belongs on the trail and not in your investing or your personal life. So if you are looking to take your first or next step in, your investing, please make sure you go down to the show notes below and schedule a time. Let's talk. I like to know what are your goals. And it's a very fun, comfortable conversation. And if it's not something that Three Keys Investments can support you with, guess what? I know a lot of really amazing people that I can connect you up with. And I do. I have a strong track record of doing that. If you need support and you feel like you're stuck and you're not living the life that you want to live, then make sure you go to the show notes and schedule time for us to chat and see if performance coaching is something that is going to support you. Until next time, cheers to your health, your mindset, and your wealth.